Since the combat changes are coming, let me just give you a quick chapter 3 guide. I guess come back when you're having trouble if you don't want the enemy gimmick spoiled. Team building for this chapter is actually a requirement this time, and you won't just steamroll everything. The resistances you should be aiming for are Blunt Ineffective and Pierce Normal, or Pierce Ineffective and Blunt Normal. My recommendation using base characters are Ishmael, Heathcliff, possibly Yi Sang or anybody, Mersault, and Faust or Honglu. You have to realize that some of these have their own quirks that you might have to learn. For other identities you can roll with, R-Corp Ishmael is a godsend, and so is G-Corp Otis because her high roll blunt attacks. And if you wanna go full on ballistic, you can ignore weaknesses and go for bleed, or units who have a lot of coins. Why does that work, you may be asking? Well, damage happens after every coin flip, and every time you roll heads the number increases. Dodge directly counters this, as if you roll high enough, you can guarantee to avoid several of the starting strikes. Defense, however, works way better at minimizing damage from one big coin. Enemies for the first half of this chapter defend, and regenerate health while they do. Out DPSing them is basically the best option. Since damage buildup works the way it does, having a lot of coins can absolutely wipe everything ignoring resistances. Bleed also helps since enemies often have as many coins as you. Thread Spin level 3 skills are basically mandatory part to beat this chapter, so get ready to invest. If you pick the more defensive team and are a little underleveled, you might run into an issue where the game becomes a I lose clashes and get dealt no damage until my sanity goes up and I win only because my max values are higher than the enemies. Yes, to alleviate this, building around Honglu's or Faust's AoE egos is a good idea. Preferably Faust's, because base Honglu is now Thread Spin free, and his non-active passive is a godsend. With this, these stages should be fairly beatable with low-level units. Remember to use your egos. If you went full on defense, you can even ignore getting the shit smacked out of you, and save up to use ego skills. And now for the second half of this chapter. Enemies will now switch their focus to half Pierce, half Blunt, and will begin to counter using Wrath counterattacks. Counter activates after your unit attacks the enemy, and it can only activate once. If the enemy uses the counter as the second skill, that means there's one free skill slot where your units will attack unopposed. Actually, I'm stupid, that's all defense skills. Your Sin affinity weaknesses are defined by your weakest ego. For now, I know only Gregor has a second Zane ego, I think, so you can't really do much to avoid the damage. Using an ego of a higher rarity will take the positive resistances and inherit them onto your character. For some of you, this might end up being useful. These fights aren't that conceptually different from the previous ones, just don't bleed out. Enemies are still weak to blunt trauma. Now what you've been waiting for, the penultimate and ultimate fight before the dungeon. Level your characters. I'm joking. Kinda. If you wanna steamroll these levels in do EX conditions, level 23 is the minimum I found that allows you to win most of the clashes easily. But otherwise, learn to separate your dashboard. Once you start actually thinking about the moves you do and how you can use the segments of the dashboard, it will all make sense. Once an enemy is staggered, the first part of the dashboard is free. I know we all Oonga Boonga'd the last parts of the game, but don't Oonga Boonga now. Think, damn it. Think. Don't use all of your strong skills here. Consider trying to get the minimum requirement to kill, if you even can kill. This space can be used for a lot. To set up resonance to deal more damage later after winning clashes, activating passives or collecting materials for those AoE blunt ego skills, or any ego skills that can win a clash and save someone on a bad turn. Same with if the enemy has less skill slots than you, finishing up passives at the end can be pretty game changing. Or again, gaining ego material / finishing off enemies uncontested. I can't live without saying this even if it gets patched out, but you can switch targets by using defensive skills. Defensive skills don't target a skill slot, meaning the next unit over can take a brunt of an ugly attack. Plus, you'll have extra protection if your current unit fails a clash. You also may have noticed that Heathcliff's and Ishmael's base ego ignores staggered units and goes for clashes instead, as well as allow them to take priority in the turn order. This can be very useful to, again, avoid your units losing clashes or getting hit by strong attacks. Basically, all of this is to say, don't leave your units who go against staggered units or are uncontested without skills that can win clashes next turn. Before the woman whistles. Actually, looking at the third row helps in this regard, since you can see the upcoming skills, as well as understanding that every whistle regens the enemy's sanity. With all I've said, you should be able to clear these stages under-leveled. To EX them, that's debatable. The dungeon does not follow the gimmick of blunt and pierce attacks. Basically, already consider making a team of 2 gimmicks, and don't use more than 2 burn or bleed units. Also, start reading. This is all I actually wanted from this game. Actual puzzle fights are in this dungeon, so best of luck. Okay, so let's end with this. My opinion on 317 and 318 being so hard is... it's really not. The issue is the game's pacing and lack of tutorials. You need to force a player to grind at the start of the chapter, not the end. Not right after the player just steamrolled for an entire chapter with basically just using defense. I think 317 deserves a nerf, but currently it's the most fun stage to mess around and build low-level teams with. So having the current difficulty as an extra stage, same with the old mariachi boss, would actually be pretty nice. The game very much fails to make you think about what you're doing, and I don't think the upcoming gameplay changes and what the community wants by complaining are gonna fix that. I actually like the current combat system and the randomness it has, knowing all of the tools under my disposal and actually thinking about the moves. Project Moon for now is way too pliable by their fans, and I fear for the future of this game and its creative vision because of it. The real thing we should be tackling is the fact that the game fails at teaching you these gimmicks. For example, some ego skipping stagger targets or using defensive skills to change turn order should be taught somewhere, together with which skills are effective against these defensive skills. Besides that, having a final boss that is hard to EX is actually a pretty good choice. So yeah, see you around after the combat update where I rip my eyes out.